Welcome everyone to the 17th event of Sitecore Headless User Group. Today we have two speakers. We have Thom, we have Tyler. Thom Puiman is the first one who will be telling us about the rendering approaches for Next.js and XM Cloud. Tyler follows him, telling us more insights about SWR. Let's dive in. Thom, stage is yours.
All right, thank you. Let me introduce myself a little bit. I'm Thom. I'm a solution architect at Vertis. I'm based in Thailand. Currently in Singapore, so morning for me. So the reason that I thought of this topic was that I'm also working, just like some of you, I'm also working on a migration from Sitecore XM to Sitecore XM Cloud. And of course, I'm also traditionally a .NET developer, so shifting to Next.js is a little bit of a, I would say, paradigm shift. You need to suddenly you need to think about what is client-side rendering and what is server-side rendering. While in the traditional ASP.NET way, we just only think about server-side rendering, right? Where you have our razor views, our controllers, right? And we prepare everything on the server and then serve a full rendered HTML document to the client, which is a lot more simpler. So this also took me a little bit of time to figure out. So hopefully my pain I can share with you to relieve you of that pain. Let's dive straight into it. All right, so first of all, I want to give you a little bit. Hopefully, it's not new to you, but I'll go through it regardless. So there's a few layers in XM Cloud, right? So over here we have the content management role, right, which essentially is still Sitecore XM instance, right, that is running on Sitecore servers, right? And this would host the core Sitecore role, right, the workload. So this one is essentially only for content authoring, right? So if you run your experience editor on there, you have content authoring, right? Your business users will log in here, as well as the preview API, right? So if you use the preview API, this will go directly to the content management role. But of course, this one in itself should ideally not be public facing, right? So your public facing sites should not go directly here. First of all, because of the API threshold, right? So the number of queries that is coming to that server is of course limited, right? And of course, it's not as scalable as Experience Edge would be. Right, so if you edit content, you push that. If you publish, it will push that to Experience Edge, which is of course the public-facing layer. Right, so if our app will query its content from the GraphQL endpoint on Experience Edge, right? So that's going to be our production API, a production mode where content will be rendered from for the client. Okay, so so there are several options in which we can get that content, right? So we can just query it as we need it from the client, right? So we can directly from Experience Edge we can query content if we need as GraphQL queries. We can query that content from our server, right? So if we want to run a GraphQL query to Experience Edge, we can run it on the server and then serve static HTML to the client, right? Or we can do that during build time, right? So those modes I'm gonna show to you over this presentation. and how you can apply that in your Next.js implementation. All right, so first let's go through those rendering approaches and why would you choose one over the other. So we have CSR, which stands for client-side rendering, right? So that is when the component is rendering on the client side entirely. When we have server-side, right, where the component is still rendered on demand, right? So as and when the page is being requested, the component will be rendered on the server side and then return HTML back to the browser. And then static site generation, that is when the pages that you select are being pre-rendered, as in the static HTML is generated for them and is already being pre-rendered before any client even requests that page, and then is being served as a static page, right? As a static HTML to the client, right? So those are basically the three different rendering approaches that we can choose from in Next.js on XM Cloud. All right, so first one is client-side rendering, right? So this is helpful for highly dynamic components where content is changing all the time. Or if you can use it if you, for example, need authenticated access to something, right? So for example, a user profile where you are showing user data. That is, of course, not something that you can pre-render, because if you pre-render that content, it will be available to all users, right? So you don't want to expose basically authenticated data in those kind of components. So then you would maybe choose for client-side rendering. The cons of using this approach is it will increase your bundle size of your app, right? So that the JavaScript files that you need to download as a client will get bigger because all of those components are embedded in that bundle. And that will, of course, also lead to longer loading time for the page. It will also use more browser resources because your browser will need to execute that JavaScript, render that component, right? Which will, of course, make the browser a little bit more sluggish. It will not be for a few individual components, right? But if your entire site is client-side rendering, it may, affect the loading time as well. It has some impact on accessibility, right? Because some screen readers may not, I think we come a long way, so it may not be as much anymore, but still it is affecting accessibility of your website. SEO and social crawling. It's, I think nowadays the Google crawler is handling JavaScript, React and client-side rendering just fine. But it's still being considered as one of the downsides of using client-side rendering. Then server-side rendering. So this one is I generally use if you, for example, have you need to use an API where you need some secret keys, for example, right? So I have it can be an API that is serving me some data that I need to present on my page. But that API requires some API key that I don't want to have in my client-side bundle, for example, right? So then I would choose for server-side rendering, right? It can also be that, again, also if you want to have access to authenticated resources such as a user profile, or if I need to log in to access some data, right? So then I would also use server-side rendering, for example. And you can also still apply edge level caching as well, right? So if you want to cache that output as well, you can also do that. If you have a particular use case that you don't want to use static site generation, you can still use server-side rendering and then cache that data as well. It's also a possibility. I think the cons of this, I couldn't find too many cons, but compute usage, it may increase sort of the compute usage you may have in Vercel. So if you, so I would say choose it based on the users that you have. So yeah, if you go for everything server-side rendering, then of course it may increase your function invocations by a lot. But if you use this selectively and understand when you would use this, then it would be more manageable. I think by first, the static site generation should be, I would say, the first weapon of choice from these three. Unless you have any reasons for the former choices, I would normally by default use static site generation. Because it provides the best performance, SEO performance, and I would say it's as a pattern in Next.js. I would say that's also the best option to keep the workflow more clean, and also to avoid the exposing. To keep the site smaller that you serve to your clients as well. And I think only the only downside, and again, this is also a consideration that you need to take, right? If your site has a lot of content, then you maybe need to be more selective in the pages that you are including in this, right? But yeah, it will increase the time to deploy your app. But there are some tricks that you can tweak that a little bit, right? So there are ways to speed up that process, or for example, to generate pages on demand as well. That is also a possibility. So I will go over those shortly. All right, so then how to implement that? Okay, so I put over here a version because I only when I started recently looking into the new content, the new content API. I also figured out these were actually deprecated. So the way that you can control whether a component is being server-side rendered or being included in the static site generation, right, is using get server-side props and get static props. All right, so get server-side props is a function that you can include in your component that will precompile the data that you need for your component to run on the server, right? So then every time that it gets server-side props will be executed. So for get server-side props is SSR, right? So this will be run on every page load. So every page load, it will Next.js will run this function and will take the props and inject it into the component, and then eventually the component output it will serve to the client. Get static props is only run on build time, right? So on build time, it will run get static props. It will capture the props that you generate in that function, and then it will inject that into the component, and then store the static HTML, and then serve that static HTML to all users. And at least in the JSS version of the JSS SDK version, you can't use them both at the same time, right? So you can't use get server-side props and get static props in the same component, right? So you need to choose between either of them. Now for the content SDK, right, which is the newer version of the XM Cloud SDK, right? They consolidated those two functions, right, into get component server props, right? So get component server props is being called both on build time and on every page load. But within that function, you can add some logic to check whether the context of that particular function call is server side or build time. Then based on that, you can decide what props you are returning and generating. So if you starting to get into static site generation, right, this is an important function that you can find within your page routes. So get static paths is being called by Next.js to understand what pages you want to include in your static site generation, right? So you can be selective in what pages you are including as part of the static site generation. And again, like I said, one, if you have a very big site and you don't want to pre-compile everything, right? So then you can choose to exclude those, for example, right? Or if you have, for example, dynamic pages, I will shortly show you a situation of a wildcard where maybe not all the URLs are known to Sitecore, so I have to add in my dynamic URLs in there. So then you can also use this function to extend that as well. So there's a few things of importance here. So first of all, it will again, you can change this to your liking, but only for production builds, right? We don't want to use this for development. So if you want to run your own local development server, you just want to you don't want to have any static site generation, right? So only for production builds, right? Then actually the SDK will request a sitemap from XM Cloud and then transform that into a static paths array and basically get all the URLs within your websites. And then this one is the fallback mode. So as far as I know, only blocking is supported for this particular approach. But this is essentially controlling that the URLs that are not included in your in your static site in your paths array there. What should Next.js do with that, right? So should it still go back to the server to generate the to basically request the URL and render that and serve it to the client, or we just want to throw in 404 error? And so with the fallback, we can control that, right? As long as you keep it on blocking, it's fine. So if the URL is not there, it will still load the page as either as SSR or CSR. And then building. So once you set up everything, you can run npm run build. That will both bundle your app and then also run the static site generation. Right, so this is actually the output that npm run build will give you, which actually contains a list of all the pages that it processed. Right, so so you can see here a legend. So you can see this icon is static content. This one is SSG, right? So this is what the get static paths essentially generated. And then this is fully dynamic pages, right? So these are not pre-rendered, but whenever someone requests your page, Next.js will render that and serve it to the client. This can also, the dynamic ones can also include a function. So if you are using the backend for frontend middleware in Next.js, and you create some custom API endpoints within Next.js, then it will also be added as a function as well. All right. So for example, these API endpoints are there as API only, essentially. So yeah, I'll go through the app in a moment. So but what I essentially did is I had a this is where I spent some time to figure out how we can do that, because there's one thing that I only found out later, because my development has started on the preview API, as any other developer would do, right? And we had to need to use a wildcard item, right? And traditionally in Sitecore XM, you create a wildcard item, and then hey, you can basically use a dynamic URL, right? So in my case, I wanted to show that all the different doc breeds, right? So I had doc and then a wildcard item there. So essentially, I can type in whatever value I want after the /docs. And then in the good old Sitecore XM, it would just render that wildcard item, right? And then I can show the components that I configured on that wildcard item. In Sitecore XM Cloud on the preview API, it worked the same, right? So I still, so if I do Chihuahua, I still get my wildcard item. However, on the Experience Edge, it doesn't. So it doesn't resolve that with a wildcard item, right? But it will show basically an empty response, right? So there's some tweaking. It is possible to still use dynamic URLs there, but you need to reconfigure some stuff in Next.js in order for that to work. But yeah, I'll go over that in a short while. So let me switch over to my code base, right? So I have the skate park example starter kit here. And what I did is I implemented a wildcard, right? So I can actually show you in XM Cloud over here. I have my site here, /docs/wildcard, right? And then over here I have my basically I show a photo of a Shiba, and I also had Chihuahua, hopefully I spelled correctly, and there we go. Chihuahua in a dress. Right, so what I did for that is I implemented an API that is giving me a random image of a particular dog breed. So first of all, it has an API to show me all the different dog breeds that I have. And then if I take that dog breed, I can do another API call to get the actual image of that, or to get a random image of that dog breed. Right, so what I did for that is, first of all, in my get static paths, right, I implemented that API, right? So over here, I have the API that I just mentioned, right? This will give me all the dog breeds that I have, right? An array of all the dog breeds. So this array, I will add into my paths array, as you can see here, right? And the reason that I need to do that, right, because the wildcard item, Sitecore at that point doesn't know about the dog breeds that I have, right? So it doesn't know those different permutations that I have, right? So it doesn't know all those dynamic paths yet. So I'm basically adding those paths into my paths array, right? So that's essentially, let me see if I can go to the build output, right? So I just ran a npm run build here. And so essentially it is generating those URLs here and adding that into the paths array. So that way that Next.js knows that eventually it has all these pages here and should generate content for those as well. All right. And then I also had to I forgot it. Oh yeah, so over here I also had to do a customization to so if a URL is incoming, right? I need to tell Next.js that it should use this path to the layout Sitecore layout service, right? Because this is considered in the GraphQL endpoint a wildcard item, right? So for the layout service, this will resolve to the wildcard item, right? So for the layout surface, it will force it to use the wildcard item, right? But in Next.js, when rendering my components, it will still use /docs/Shiba, right? So that way, it will return me all the presentation details from that wildcard item, so that I can still render my page as per normal. All right. And then I also wanted to show the build output as well. Every build will have all the static HTML compiled, right? So all of these. So I'm over here. I will for every page, for every doc read, right? I will get an entry in my build folder eventually after a successful build, and with the HTML for that particular page, as well as the props that I passed into that component as values directly into the HTML, right? So it's really the static HTML that will serve with all the values that I decided at build time. All right, and then going into the actual component over here, so this is my component, right? And you can see that I have a prop called image URL, right? And this image URL, I'm passing into my image here, right? And that is the image that I'm getting from the API, right? But that image URL is being queried on build time, actually, right? So that is in get component server props here. So the get component service props will be executed on build time, right? And over here, it will call the API to give me a random image of that particular doc read, and then it will return that as a prop here, image URL. And that will so in the static output of my component, right, of my page, right, it will be passed into the actual component, right? So this is where we essentially pre-compile the data for the component and return that data in here as a prop. So this is pretty much for static site generation. So for server-side generation, with the new content SDK, it's hey, you do it in the same way. So get component server props. I had some trouble to getting this to work for particularly SSI. It kept using SSG here, so I'm not entirely sure what exactly the problem was. But essentially, what it will how we can differentiate between that. Now I need to hang on now. Yeah, we need to essentially use the context over here. And then we can check if is server-side props context over here. That will that way we can essentially hang on now. Yeah, you also need to read an empty yeah, otherwise if you don't return anything, then it will give an error. So essentially with this, we can differentiate between SSR and SSG as well, right? So this way it will check whether we are in an SSR context or an SSG context. And as you can see, the actual code, it is determining whether the type of context is get server-side props context or not, right? So Otherwise, if it's SSG, then the type will be get static props context over here. So yeah, SSR is really if you, for example, have API calls that are protected APIs that you don't want to expose to your clients, then it makes sense to use SSR. So that is, for example, the use case here. I have a weather API that I'm calling. That weather API, for example, I need an API key for, so that when I run on server side there. Cool. That's pretty much wraps up everything that I wanted to share. Any questions that I can answer?
Yeah, so the very first question I got from the audience is why is it better to use the combined methods instead of the individual ones? That relates to content SDK. Remember, you mentioned the shared method, and why the question was why was that instead of get static server side?
Yeah, so actually, I also tried to figure that out because I also was also a little bit confused when I initially got that. I also don't have the answer, but I believe I know in the changelog it says this approach was more cleaner in their opinion. So yeah.
I get my best guess, and I think that the authors of Content SDK decided to simplify things, and as you know, they made a lot of housekeeping things. They clean stuff, they simplified, they drop plenty, like almost half of the lines of the codes. At least that's what I get from them. And maybe that was another improvement for simplicity. But that's my guess. I don't work for Sitecore. I don't build Content SDK. So that was the question from the audience. I actually have my own question, not actually question. It's just couple side notes. So if you can scroll back to the client side slide, which you heard initially.
Yeah.
So there was a use case, like when would you use this? And you have user-specific content required access to authenticated resources. So I want to add a side note. So you can use this approach for the public APIs if you do direct calls from the client. And if you have to use any sort of like any sort of credentials or any secret or any non-public information, you must do that through your own API. So you must first send requests to your own hosted API, which will then grab the credentials safely and do the request. Because if you don't do that, your credentials will go into bundle. They will be on client. So that is an important note.
Yeah, I think the one use case that I specifically had is for example, you have a personal JWT token that you can send directly to the external API that you need. For example, Order Cloud is one of them, right? So as a client, you have a JWT as a cookie, for example, that when you can send directly to Order Cloud without first going to the server. So that is, for example, one use case there. But yeah, again, it's of course, yeah, you cannot an API key that is a secret. You cannot share that to the client side. Yeah, of course.
And my another note is that you probably will not use SSG in its clean essence. You would likely to switch to ISR, which stands for incremental static regeneration. And that's where you can define what you want to generate, what you want to not generate, and balance between the request and regeneration. But I understand you want to keep it simple, and you didn't cover that for intents. And again, thank you very much for the demo, which didn't have all this unwanted complexity, so it was ultra focused on what you want to demonstrate. Awesome. Maybe someone else has any questions, Tom. Looks like no one has. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
And we pass the stage to Tyler. Tyler Holmes, welcome.
Awesome. Thanks, Martin. How are you?
Oh, I'm very interested in learning about SWR.
Thanks, Martin. And Tom, that was a great presentation. Thank you for that. It was really insightful. Today I'll be talking about architecting complex forms and then also utilizing SWR alongside that when you're building any complex forms for your clients. I myself am a senior front-end developer for Fish Tank Consulting. And this is something that I try and improve and implement these methods into all of the sites when we're architecting and building out client sites. So today's agenda, we're going to be covering what is SWR, how does SWR work, when you should segregate forms, understanding the code segregation, understanding the user flow, SWR both inside and outside of Sitecore, so using it directly when calling Sitecore, and then using it for anything else outside of that. Architecting your forms file structure inside your Next.js solution, and then obviously Sitecore pages and experience editor, and then the potential problems that come along with that, as well as the solution to those problems. So if we get started here, the first up here, what is SWR? So you can see here I got a little screenshot from the Vercel website of SWR, but SWR itself stands for stale while revalidate, which is a type of caching. You may also know it as hydration. It's a pretty standard procedure. And SWR itself is a hook that was built specifically for React and Next.js by Vercel, and Vercel obviously the people who make Next.js. It essentially allows you to return cached data when you hit the same endpoint on multiple pages, and then you get to choose when you want to update or revalidate that data, all the cached data. It makes handling any client-side API calls easier to manage, and it works really well with both static and server-side generation, which was what Tom was talking about. And it also isn't limited to a specific language either. It can easily be used with both REST, GraphQL calls, anything you want. It's just a way to call the data, similar to using fetch. So why do we want to use SWR with Sitecore? Well, the main reason is it reduces API load with caching. It allows pages to load fast with cached data. This gives the appearance of faster APIs. So if you're heavily restricted by how slow your APIs are, this is a great way to circumvent that and give the appearance of a faster website. It also allows you to easily updating any existing data. So a great example of that could be if you had a counter that's showing how many people visited a page, you can update that every 10 people, every 10 seconds. You can kind of get right down into the details and update that as much and easily as you want. So how does SWR work itself? So the first step is obviously importing the npm package, and then we can create our fetch function. So for this example, I'm using a one-line generic REST fetch function. This function can be as complex as you want. It can be REST, GraphQL. You're not limited on what you can use. It's just a simple example. After that, we're going to create our use SWR hook. So this is the hook that gets imported directly from the npm package. And it's what connects all the pieces together and gives us that amazing utility and tools from SWR. So we pass in the function we created directly into the hook, and this will be used to pull all of our data dynamically. And then the URL we provide is our key for the cache identity. So this is what's going to be used kind of as like the key attribute. It's the same as a key attribute on a next image, or like a primary key in a database, kind of, if you want to take a little bit of an extra long distance step. It tells SWR to cache the response for that specific URL and then use that cache data for any other incoming queries to that URL. And so this URL would most likely be your Next.js serverless function API route, since you use Next.js, but it'll also work with a Sitecore layout service endpoint or a GraphQL endpoint with a fetcher set up for GraphQL. And then the broken down section here, the data error and is loading, this is what the data comes back as. This is how SWR handles the data and returns it to you as a developer. This allows for immediate handling of those three major states of the API call from directly within the SWR hook itself. So there's no need to create, manage, or kind of mess around with these states yourself, whereas normally you'd be creating your own use state items for these. It's built entirely into SWR. So it really simplifies your API calls. So as for the data flow, to give you a rough idea of kind of how the data flow flows, there are 3 major steps for SWR. So the first one is it's going to show the cached data if it's available. So when the user lands on the page, it's first going to try and show that cached data. This is what gives the fast, responsive UI. If there's no cache, then you can utilize the isLoading value to display a loading skeleton or some type of loading screen as it pulls the data the first time. Step 2 is SWR is going to revalidate and fetch new data if it exists and if it's matched your revalidation settings. And then after it's obtained the new data, it's going to attempt to hydrate and replace the new data on the page. So it's just going to update the values of the data directly there on the user's page without the user needing to refresh. For example, I gave before was like a page view counter. The counter will just automatically update. And you see this kind of implementations a lot on tons of sites, especially like YouTube. You're looking at the view count or like button going up. It's a very common practice. So taking more of a step back and looking at kind of the architecture standpoint of how you can plan out these big forms to be utilized with SWR, you want to start to be thinking about when should you be segregating out these pieces, and then you can slot that in with SWR. So the main times where you want to be really thinking about segregating your forms is when you have a complex design. If your designer or client is giving you large multi-page complex forms, or you can just in general see that every page or every page of this multi-page complex form is just going to have a lot of code. You need to make unique API calls between each step. So a lot of the times you need to make specific calls, just pull specific data. So you can do that on each individual step instead of all at once at the front. Or you just want to keep, like I said, you want to keep your code organized, readable, and structured. This is generally apparent when you have multi-page complex forms. So here I have an example that I just pulled from Dribble. This is just a quick example I pulled when I looked up forms on Dribble. It's got all sorts of different points here. You've got like a multi-page step at the top there and a bunch of different inputs. So when you're building out your form, you'd build one component file for this entire form. So this would be an entire TSX file. And this is what you connect to your Sitecore rendering. And then inside of that, we would split out the different chunks of this form into their own subcomponents, so they're child components. So here I have in purple, we have at the top there, we have the different pages will be one component, the dispatchable generator section, the toolkit, like all of the inputs there for inputting your kilowattage, as well as the next and previous step buttons can all be their own individual component files, their own TSX files. They're then imported into the parent file. And you can even take that one step further by creating grandchild components. So the best example for this would be the install capacity section down there towards the bottom. You just create one of those install capacity components and then loop through it based on the data you're getting back from Sitecore to create all of the different inputs. But yeah, the main idea here is just keep creating subcomponents inside subcomponents to reduce the amount of code that you have within one file. So if we look at kind of like a user flow diagram and how the data is passed between Sitecore to the user, when the user first lands on the page, Sitecore is going to send the data directly to the home page. Assuming they land on the home page, it's going to send all that data there for the page. And then when they navigate to our form, Sitecore will also send the data from Sitecore to the form. So that's pretty standard stuff. That's everything we already know. But the idea here is what we want to do is only send the HTML for step 1 to the user when they land on that page. So step 1 is loaded immediately, and that's all we're sending to them. Then the user, if they go to step 2, assume step 1 has a conditional output. If they choose one option from a dropdown, they'll go to step 2A. If they choose a different option from the dropdown, they're going to go to step 2B. If they go to step 2A, only the code for step 2A will be loaded. And therefore, if there's a SWR call within 2A, it only calls it once. And the same would work for step 2B. So these are two different branching tree options of where the user might end up in a form. And the benefit of using SWR with this is you can have the call specifically on step 2A or step 2B instead of doing all of the calls at the front of the form and then sending unneeded data to the front end. So that's helpful for both, obviously, the user who's going to be going through the form, but also more beneficial on the server side. You're not sending as much unneeded data that may never be seen. And then finally, you just lazy load step 3. In this example form, they all route to the same place. But that's the main idea there, is splitting up your form into multiple steps and then lazy loading and only loading what's needed as the user arrives to it. So that brings us a bit more into where SWR fits into a Sitecore setup, kind of like what I just said, but we can continue to be fetching Sitecore content dynamically, right? The main benefit of using SWR is to pull data from Sitecore either through the layout service or more likely a GraphQL endpoint. And this is important because it allows the website to automatically update dynamic content from Sitecore or immediately load cached data if a user is returning to the page. So another example of this could be useful, say you're pulling data from Sitecore for a navigation menu where you need lots of different parents and random child throughout the Sitecore tree. You can reduce the amount of data being sent to the front end on page load and essentially code split the incoming data from Sitecore by using SWR. So yeah, the idea is just making separate API calls to Sitecore, and it's something that I try to implement a lot on our project for our clients. So another benefit is you can infinitely load Sitecore items. So think blog posts or products are probably the two most common you'll see for clients. So you'll set up the use SWR infinite function, which comes along with the NPM package. This is super useful if you're displaying, like I said, that large amount of content and you know it's going to paginate, but you want to have that seamless scroll that you get on like Instagram, YouTube, or like LinkedIn. So the get key property, which is the first input there into the SWR infinite hook, defines the pagination, while the fetcher is just the same fetch function that we created before. It can be any kind of fetch function you'd like. So we can define that get key function to pull data directly, which keeps our requests kind of like small and fast, which is what we want, especially when dealing with mobile devices. It's better to have a lot of small requests than one really, really big one. So the big benefit of using SWR over just preloading all that data in server-side rendering is that improved performance. It keeps your static pages loading fast by reducing the initial byte size we send to the user on first load. And by choosing to pull that data after the page is loaded, you can provide that perceived performance by reducing the size of that initial payload. So not only are you no longer waiting for the data to come from your internal APIs, you're also reducing the size of the data you're sending to the user when they first arrive on the page. Now, SWR is also super useful outside of just Sitecore. In fact, that's a lot of the times we use it for when we're communicating with client APIs, so any CIM API. But it can be used for any GET request or really any request at all. The built-in caching is just extremely powerful and it makes it very strong, especially for how lightweight it is. Just pull data from any existing APIs. So if you're working on any API-heavy projects, you could definitely take advantage of this. Just think about pulling data from like anything to do with payments or maybe user account data or anything like that. Any existing API, this is very, very beneficial and can be used outside of just pulling data directly from Sitecore. So just to kind of touch a little bit more on architecting forms, I want to talk a little bit about the file structure you can also do when you're kind of building out all these multiple components. And one of the best ways to do it is to kind of plan the layout before you actually start coding, which is something a lot of people hate. And I know sometimes I get a little flack from it from our own developers where we're like, oh, we've got to do planning. We can't just start typing. But yeah, it's better to kind of split everything out. So here inside our Next.js project, I have two component folders, one for just components. These are going to be the components that Sitecore looks at and you connect to your Sitecore renderings. Component children is not like any components that are not connected directly to Sitecore, so do not have a relation to any renderings. And this is so that Sitecore doesn't kind of crawl and query all of these unneeded components. So in this example, I have our complex form there under components, and then inside of component children, I have a folder called complex form, and then another folder for each individual step. So our parent component would obviously be our complex form, and then the child components are inside these folders here as well. And I also have a subfolder for grandchild components if we're really drilling down, if it's super complex and there's a lot going on. But most of the time, you'd probably be fine just with the subcomponents without the grandchildren. So just to kind of show a bit of a code example here, this is just an example of what the parent file might look like. So I have a use effect here that's just helping determine when we're going to be switching between page 1, 2, 3, and 4 in this theoretical 4-page form, just by looking at a query string. And then depending on what the value of the use state form stage is, if it's set to 1, we will return only step 1. If it's set to 2, we'll return only step 2, and the same for step 3. So this kind of example really shows that we're only showcasing the data that's being sent and showcasing the steps as we go, really cleaning up the code and can very quickly reduce very large code files into be something much more smaller and easier to read. So the final thing I like to kind of touch on is ensuring that your code is pages and experience editor editable. So when can doing coding like this, splitting up your forms, when can this be a problem in pages? Usually when a user needs to interact with part of the form that affects something else. So if they select an item from a drop-down and that changes the display of something, that can be a problem. Or sometimes just the design is just very difficult to accommodate inside Sitecore pages, especially as you build it. The solution we usually take is to just build out a specific component for Sitecore itself. So we take those multiple small subset components that we have and then split them into an editable version that's specific for Sitecore. So you can start by putting an early return statement in any of your functions that require user interaction. So any use effects, any functions, any callbacks, anything that where the code's running, including in your fetch function for your SWR calls. And this just stops the code from running when it's inside Experience Editor, because obviously it's not needed. And then inside the return statement itself, you just put your simplified version that you created using the subcomponents you already have for Sitecore in the if it's in editing section, and then the normal return would be in the else statement in this ternary, for example. So that's all I have. If anyone has any questions, please let me know. But yeah, that's my presentation. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Tyler. That was really insightful. Lots of important things compressed in 20 minutes.
Yeah, trying
I
to
love
get through as much as I can and teach as much as I can. Yeah.
The good news is that all that will be recorded, and whoever needs, we can refer to the recording many times, especially if we're using SWR.
Mm.
Aside from that, I want to admit and thank you, not you just personally, but Fish Tank for being such a good member of the community as a partner, because you guys generate insane amount of valuable content, first of all on the website, and then your developers are very often guests here at this particular user group. So as an organizer, I want to thank whoever stands behind this awesome engineering culture at Fish Tank. Please pass them my warm thank you and welcome them to this user group as well.
I will. Thank you.
Awesome. So question time. Anyone has questions?
Yeah, I posted one. Hi, Thomas Falcon. I work with Cracker Barrel. I'm the senior front-end developer there. And I was wondering, do you have any advice on how to keep are you doing end-to-end testing or just unit testing when you're doing SWR fetch for your data on forms?
It's very dependent on the client, how we kind of approach the testing, because a lot of the times it's very based on what their interaction and what their server and their APIs are.
Okay.
Generally, we do try to set up some type of form of unit testing to kind of check the responses. How we use Storybook a lot when we're doing developments for clients.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're doing that, we'll set up mock data that mimics their API responses. And then within Storybook, we're returning that mock data through SWR to kind of get that test, kind of set that baseline, like kind of unit test baseline, and then we can test everything along that. That's usually how we approach it.
So even with the move to Content SDK, you find you guys are still getting use out of the Storybook approach?
Yeah, especially like very early on in development. Later on, once it's very deep into the process and you're on release 3, release 4, maybe a little less so. But yeah, especially releases 1, 2, that's usually when you get the most benefit, yeah.
And then do unit testing. Because we've been having a lot of, especially around data needs and forms. It's like, well, we would love to do an end-to-end test to make sure all of our systems work, but that means actually processing forms in the database
Yeah.
for testing. So I put together basically just unit testing is the only alternative. I was wondering if you guys had a clever solution.
Yeah, that's all we do is just unit testing as well, nothing special. Yeah, it's frustrating, but especially when the client's APIs are unique would be a polite way to put it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great way to put it. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Do you use Storybook for all of the projects you run? or is it some specifics?
Yeah, we usually start with Storybook immediately, and that allows us to get development going while the client still works on getting their Sitecore site set up. A lot of the times we're building brand new sites, upgrading them. So most of the time we can kind of get started, get building, yeah, while they're still setting up the new Sitecore instance.
It's probably not the best solution for lift and shift, whoever do that, but for redesign, it's something that is a must.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
I was wondering if anyone knew, it might be just more general, but if anyone knew if there's plans to update the boilerplate application that you generate with like an example of each of these, because that'd be really helpful, I think. Like, hey, here's SWR and a 5-bullet list that you can read to decide if you think it's best. Because you have a lot of Sitecore. Like I've been web, Next.js, React my whole life. I came to Sitecore from web side, but all of our Sitecore resources, they're still thinking how things were in with JSS and how things were in before XM Cloud. And it'd be kind of nice just to give them a cheat sheet, just says, hey, doing this, answer these questions, generate this component, create an SWR component, create an SSG one instead for this other use case, and kind of just boilerplate a lot of this out. Because the docs are good, they're always evolving, but it takes almost as much time just to get a working example as it does to get the documentation up to date.
Yeah,
that's where probably I can step in for doing these type of things. So you can create custom GPT, train it exactly as you describe, and then you will be prompting it, getting exactly what you just explained you would like to receive. More to say, you can use that through API, so you can build that into any interface, like let's say a client-facing or developer-facing website that has this questionnaire, and clicking them and pasting their specific snippets, they will receive specific responses.
Mm-hmm.
Again, like I myself am from the AI first company, so that's how we think.
That's how you're thinking
we
through
don't
it,
do
yeah.
things by hands. We first think about how to do AI, and we fall back to manual effort only when we fail with AI.
Oh, excellent. Thank you.
Awesome.
I also wanted to chip in. Literally, I think last week they updated the starter kit repo as well, and they created a few more apps as well. So maybe also look into the starter kit. There's a few other templates that they also created. Yeah.
Cool.
You're talking about 22.9 GSS, is it?
No, Content SDK
Content
version
SDK.
1. Yeah. So, literally just because last night I was trying to find the skate park template, so that's when I found out there's a few other templates that they also added.
That they added. Cool. I'll check it out. As that has been a little over a week.
3 demo templates in the starter kit now. 4 with the skate park.
Oh, cool. Okay, I'll check out the newest stuff then.
So I have now 6 sites running on Content SDK as a demo for me. 3 from verticals and 3 from this new starter kit altogether. So yeah, they all run nicely. I love it. And interestingly, on the previous user group here, it's this Headless user group, legendary Anton came, this guy, Anton Tishenko, Astro guy. So he came and specifically measured Content SDK versus Astro. And guess who win, of course, if Anton is presenter?
Content SDK 1? No.
Yeah.
Didn't think so.
He didn't stop
thought
on
it was a
that.
setup.
After
Sounded too
the
good.
next day after the event, he spent the whole night play testing this measurement. He ran the big numbers, and then he pinged me saying, I now have proven entirely, absolutely, that Astra runs faster than Content SDK.
Wow.
In fact, it's Astro versus Next.js. So
Yeah, because it's still Next.js.
Mm.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for attending this user group. As a reminder, it was 17th user group. We have 17 user group runs so far. There will be 18s in a month from now. I will be speaking there, and I'm always looking for engaged presenters. If you're willing to speak, DM me. I always love to have you here. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.